Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the First Time Homebuyers Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Tom Sommers with Coldwell Banker Burnett, and I am in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Eric McKenna with Remax Advanced in the Pittsburgh area. Eric, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Great to be with y'all.
Excellent. So, for those of you who have been following, as well as those that are new to this podcast, today is the last of our series of purchasing a home. We went through the whole set of steps. So if you're catching us right now, today is the final one, which is closing day. But feel free to go back and pull out insurance, picking a realtor, writing an offer. We have it all there for you. So just find us on Spreaker or YouTube. This one seems kind of odd to me because I'm sure some of you that are watching, if you clicked on thinking, okay, well, what am I going to learn? Well, we're going to teach you a couple things that are important, but we want to talk about closing day today. So, Eric, do you want to start?
Sure. I absolutely do. I mean, let's face it, the happiest moments in real estate generally is closing. Some will argue maybe when you come under agreement, that's pretty exciting as well, too. But closing is when you actually, as the buyer, take possession of the house legally, yes, physically and legally. And as Tommy and I have talked about in prior episodes, there's slight differences between state to state in how closings are done. But generally speaking, it basically is the cumulative effect of all the hard work you and your agent and the other side has put in, and all the other moving parts come together. Yep. And it's conducted by a closing company. Here in Pennsylvania, we have closing title specialists, and we also have closing officers. They're not necessarily attorneys, although they can be. Mm-hmm. And they are the figurehead of this particular closing, which their company puts together for you, the buyer. They will run the closing. They will communicate between the two parties, the buyers and the sellers, with the agents generally present, and sometimes the loan officers as well. You're going to be handling everything in terms of proration of taxes, signing over the deed. If you have a mortgage, you're going to be signing your mortgage paperwork there. Everything that encompasses the actual transaction or transfer of the property will be handled by the closing agent and all of us sitting at the table together.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out that it's nothing that you have to be fearful of, because that's what the title officer and the closing people are there for. Like Absolutely. Eric was saying, they are going to answer all of your questions. But to his point, there is typically a closer and a title company for each party. So the sellers have one and the buyers have one. So us as real estate agents attend, but the reason we're...
Not in our state, buddy.
Oh, okay.
Not in our state. Pennsylvania's a little different. The buyer runs the show. The buyer chooses the closing company, and the seller.
Even for the seller.
Indeed. So there's a difference. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So now we learned something new. In the state of Minnesota, we each can pick one. You can use the same one, but typically there's each one that is handling it. Typically, we all sit in a room together unless there's some kind of a problem. We can also put you in separate rooms. Sometimes sellers will pre-sign because they're moving out of town. So you show up and it's you and the closing people and your agent, and like Eric was saying, sometimes the loan officer, and it takes about an hour and you sign off everything. Some of the things you want to think about with a closing date is you want to make sure that if you're closing at the end of the month, to try to get a closing time as early in the day as possible, because everything that is wired through the Fed in New York. I think the last wire they do is 2 or 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Right.
So that means that if the wire doesn't go out by 2 o'clock, you got a problem. So if you can choose an early time slot for your closing, that's going to be you're going to put you in a much better position. And the other piece of it too is you need to bring your IDs with you. You need to bring typically a check, but sometimes it has to be wired. So you want to make sure that the title company, if they'll allow a cashier's check, because they rarely will allow a personal check, and if they have to wire it, getting wiring instructions. And that's about all you need, and you're going to be good to go. So I think that it should be a pretty smooth process. It should only take, like I said, about an hour, and you'll be on your way. The other thing I want to point out, which just kind of came to me, and it doesn't happen as much anymore, and I'm not sure if it was commonplace for you, but a number of years ago when there was a ton of foreclosures, they would not allow you to take possession until the loan funded. So when you sign your documents, what ends up happening is lots of times with a foreclosure, the closing agent has to send off a copy of the check, a copy of the deed, a copy of all the paperwork that was signed there other than the mortgage, and someone at the bank has to sign off on it, come back and say it's okay before you can physically take possession of the home. So also understand that if you are purchasing a foreclosure, it is a very good possibility that it might be up to 3 business days before you can actually take possession of that house.
That's a very good point. Very good point. I'd also like to add, too, that here in Pennsylvania, and I'm assuming, Tommy, it may be in your area as well, you may want to communicate. I'm sorry, buddy.
It's okay.
I apologize. The dogs are in the room here. Damn it.
That's okay. They're they look happy. So
they are happy.
We're rolling.
So,
yeah.
Anyways, what I want to stress was there are some advantages, believe it or not, of closing right past the first of the month. And the advantage is in theory, but oftentimes you can have one reprieve, 1 month of reprieve on your.
Why don't you? We'll just stop
I know.
it. Let him out.
I'm sorry, partner.
No,
I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
No.
I'm here by myself, and I'm trying to. Obviously, somebody came home, so I'll take care of it. Right?
Yeah. So, getting back to what you're saying, because Eric just let the dogs out. Ooh.
Actually, yeah, in reality. Too.
Yeah. So, all right. So start your whole thing over again.
Okay, when you are coming under agreement, one of the things as a buyer is you have the opportunity to set the closing date. Now, obviously, the seller has to agree to that, and it needs to work for both parties. And again, I can't speak universally because we're all going to have our unique circumstances. Some of us have our homes. It's a first-time home buyer podcast. Probably don't have your home, but we're all renting somewhere. So depending on when your lease is up and depending on what your arrangements for living are, your current living arrangements, oftentimes your lender can assist you with this. But if you move the closing date to just over the first of the month, let's say first, second, or third, you can actually buy yourself a reprieve on your first mortgage payment. You technically get an extra month before you have to make it. Now, the interest will accrue and add to your total, but it's often very helpful if you can make that work. So pushing the closing date past the first of the month can be financially advantageous for you, especially when you're moving and so forth. It's a good idea to always ask your agent about it and ask your mortgage lender as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point you bring up because there's a lot of people who will time it. Now, I don't know, like at least on our end, if we can go a full month or not. But typically, if you close, say, in the middle of May, you wouldn't owe your first mortgage payment till July 1st. So that really helps a lot of people, to Eric's point. So yeah, talk to your loan officer and find out if you can go a full 2 months, and that will help you as well. Because lots of times people like that are in apartments and they're transitioning to a single family or a home, they want that extra time to paint and clean and replace carpet, and that gives you that extra time before you have to move in. Plus, you don't have a payment breathing down your neck right away here after closing. The other point I would like to make as well with that is with regards to the closing date itself, it all depends on what is happening with the contract. You should, in theory, get immediate possession after closing, with the exception of what we're talking about with the foreclosures. But that's why we talked about doing that final walkthrough, because if you go to that final walkthrough 2 days before closing and they haven't packed one single thing, there's a pretty good chance you're not getting in after closing. So these kind of go hand in hand, and it's just, this is more of a function of the process, but I think it's important for us to mention these things to you because a lot of realtors don't prepare their buyers at all as to what's going to happen on closing date. So in theory, you should be able to go in, sign off, grab your keys, and drive straight over to your new property. So that's the goal.
It is the goal, and that's the exciting part of real estate. And of course, I will tell you, tradition is, regardless of whether you have any furniture, if you're husband and wife, you got to stay there the first night on a sleeping bag on the floor. You can't miss that. It's part of the whole experience. But I do want to just say generally, I pride myself in always having everything resolved for my buyer before they walk in that closing room. You do not want to go to closing with any extraneous issues at hand. Anything
exactly.
You don't want to be burning a grudge. You don't want to be coming in there with anything on your mind. It's not a confrontational arena.
It's business. It's not personal.
Right. Those things need to be resolved before you enter the closing room, and that's what your agent will do for you. If you have any extraneous issues with the seller, Get them done ahead of time. Your agent will be fastidious in getting that done for you, but you want to walk in there with a calm mind. It's a positive thing. Closing is a wonderful experience. It should be a wonderful experience for buyers, and you just want to go in there with a clear head.
Yep, absolutely. So there you go. That's what you need to know about the closing day. We are now going to move into our freelance moving forward, meaning that every week we are going to just do something different that's on our minds that we want to talk about experience-wise to help you prepare to purchase a home. As always, like Eric typically will say, if you guys are living, I don't care, Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, Florida, whatever.
Seattle.
If you don't have a realtor, reach out to us. We will help you find one at free of charge. Okay. So, but of course, if you're in the Pittsburgh area, you got to call that guy right there. If you're in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, please give me a
call
call.
that guy right there.
We're happy to help you. Yes, we're shilling for business. That's why we do this.
That's what we do. We're realtors.
Right. But we truly want you guys to learn from this, and hopefully this will help you wherever you are.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for the feedback. Thanks for sending emails and asking questions. Please keep doing so, and we will see you again next week. For Eric McKenna and myself, you are watching and listening to the First Time Homebuyers podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you guys. Thank you.